How would you like to make your first video? Today we have Victoria Pelletier with us, and she's the founder of Unstoppable You. And we'll love to ask you the question that everybody's waiting for the answer. What are the 5 steps you recommend entrepreneurs in order to make the first video?
Welcome to Unstoppable Podcast with Harry Sardinas, inspiring conversations with influential millionaires, investors, thought leaders, entrepreneurs who are making a massive difference with their innovative products and services, and sharing the challenges and wisdom of how they sold their first million.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm really happy to be here. So I'd say probably the first thing before you step into an entrepreneurial journey is it's not for the faint of heart. So Unstoppable, yes, the name of my business, but it is my motto in life. And so there's a level of resilience that you must have if you're going to start a business. So I think that's first number one. Make sure you're prepared for what that looks like and surround yourself with people around you or who are going to help you when things get very, very tough. The second is in building it. There's lots of people who are interested in the thing, the product, the service, whatever. But I would say approach it from what problem are you solving? What gap are you filling? With your new business, product or service. And the third, but really connected to that, is understanding the gap you're filling is who else is doing that. I've been approached. I do a lot of coaching and mentorship for founders, entrepreneurs, and those in big corporate, but certainly on the founder entrepreneur side, who come to me, and I've spent a lot of time in tech with great technical ideas. And I'm like, that sounds phenomenal, but I'm aware of at least 2 or 3 other companies who are doing that. So making sure not just the market fit, but market opportunity and how and where you're playing in that space. I think I would also be remiss if I didn't state, I think there's a critical step, even potentially before, resilience is always number one, I think, but even before number 2 and number 3, if I back up, is to sort of build the distribution, build an audience before you need it. And so I've spent a lot of time talking about the strength of one's individual personal brand. People do business with people that they like and they trust. So as much as you're going to be filling this gap and knowing the competitors, at the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, you're selling you. As you start to go through seed rounds, et cetera, looking to, in particular, if you need to raise capital. So build that distribution and platform before you need it. And then I'd say the fifth one is learning to, even when you don't have significant revenue, you will need to hire people to deliver, have functional expertise that you don't have. So hire for your lack of strength or weakness or just lack of experience, and learn to fire people with egos like yourself. And there's ways to go around that. There's the fractional community. There's still the bartering community that exists. I see far too many entrepreneurs trying to do it all, and they cannot do it successfully. So those are my 5.
So, Victoria, out of the 500 millionaires we interview in this podcast, 1 out of 5, so over 100, are tech millionaires and tech entrepreneurs. Can you tell us what's the good, the bad, and the ugly? Because clearly it's a good vehicle to become wealthy, because the statistic of this podcast is showing this up. But can you tell to our tech founders listening to the podcast, the check of reality, what is the good, the bad, and the ugly of tech businesses? Is that easy to become a millionaire in tech?
I'm going to give you the consultant answer, which it depends. And so I think, yes. And just, my background spans beyond tech. I've been in professional services. Some of the businesses I've bought have been outside of this space as well, but I have spent a lot of years in tech. So I think it can be amazing. So when you say good, bad, and ugly, I think good. We've all heard about the unicorns that have exited and made millions, if not billions. That said, that's the less than 1%. But I think there's an incredible opportunity to still do very, very well. Going back to the 5 steps, when you think about market fit, competitors who are in this space, building your distribution, particularly. And so that it creates incredible opportunity. I also will say, I mean, generally as a founder, one of the great things is not having to answer to someone else, making the decisions as well. That's always a great for me. You know, my husband, I also work, and we'll probably talk about it, but I also work in big corporate, and my husband jokes on that side. He's like, look, you're never going to be happy until you're the CEO of that company as well. And so that's the great thing about coming into it. The bad is, as your listeners would know, it's tough. It can be lonely. Again, you need to surround yourself, I think, with a good community, even of other founders. There's lots of organizations like EO Entrepreneurs Organization and others until you sort of scale up to help support you. But it's lonely. You work long hours. You stretch yourself, dramatically. And the ugly, can be failure. I think a lot of people don't even try because they're worried about failing. But so I've had great successes, but there's a few failures. One in particular I can think of that was pretty darn ugly and left me bruised for a period of time as a result.
It is a part of the process, right? So when we see venture capitalists, they want to find more and more spam founders, theta founders, someone that have been through the process, so they have a better understanding what it actually is gonna take. Okay, now let's talk about corporate and entrepreneurship because a lot of people are listening to this podcast and say, wow, I wish I was like Victoria because I can have my own business and be my own boss. But in corporate, at least you can tell people when they ask you to do something, look, I'm sorry, this is not my job. But when it's your business, everything is your job, right? And so tell us about this transition. What are your messages for people in corporate that they are on the edge? We have stories in this podcast that people that were doing fantastic in corporate. Then COVID came. They go fired. Now they start the business and doing very well. And after so many years, and then people say, well, I've been corporate for 20 years. Nobody ever taken me seriously. I've been bullying, whatever. One day I said, I have enough. And I start the business and look, I'm doing well. But at the same time, people go with a corporate mentality to business and it doesn't really work. It's completely different ballgame. I see founders coming from corporate telling to the team, okay, sales and marketing, this is not my job. This is your job, guys. I'm like, well, everything is your job. So for the people that are in the edge in corporate and want to feed their own calendar to the dream of the entrepreneur to be my own boss, take my own decisions, feed my own calendar, all sounds very good. But what really is gonna take? So any advice for the people on the edge?
I think back to the 5 steps that I've shared and others that your other guests have shared before making the leap. I think there's a lot of people who think it's cool, it's sexy. To your point, Harry, hey, I can like my own schedule, I can manage. That is great, but again, it's incredibly hard. I think if they're not already in a sales role in the corporations they're in, a big part of the job initially is selling. As I said, you are selling yourself as much as you then need products and services. And so I think for those who haven't built the muscle, don't have the experience, that is very difficult. So spend time sitting and ruminating with whether you're prepared, you have the experience, or you're going to hire in to help you with that growth. The other advice I'd give, and I've said this many times to people in corporate who are tired of the politics, they want to be their own boss, but perhaps they're worried. A lot of what prevents people from doing it is, as I said, fear, but also money, right? So you've got bills to pay. And so what I say is, like, where there's conviction, there is capacity. So there's your 9 to 5 that you might get paid for in a corporate environment. Not that 9 to 5 truly exists, and then there's your 5 to 9. Choose to spend it wisely. And so start to build the side hustle, start to build that distribution layer while you're employed and earning a regular paycheck. until such time as you've built up, again, enough demand, enough distribution, you have enough saved to know that you can exist for a period of time until revenue starts flowing. I think people think it's like a light switch. You can go from one to the other. And I'd say, ride it out, use that time to save, to plan, to build, so you can step away safely, particularly if the economic side is a concern.
I agree with you, Victoria, 100%. I mean, the last corporate job that I had, it was 20 years ago, and I was room service in the Hilton in Canary Wharf. And I remember that on the side, I was building my business, and I remember I built the business in the lift. When they ordered burger, I'm thinking, okay, hopefully it's go to floor 28 and 29. So then in the lift, I was making the phone call to my property business to find the houses, to the landlords, to arrange the viewings. The whole activity happened in the lift on the hit to taking room service orders, but it was transition, was gradual, right? And I remember that there were times that my salary from the Hito came day one and day two was nothing, zero, because I had to put everything in the business because I make a mistake on the line and I had to fill that gap. And it took time and it was intense, exactly what you said. You had the 9 to 5 and then and then the other one. In my case, it was 4 a.m. for 4:30. 5 a.m. I had to be in the Hilton. So it was 5 a.m. to 4 and then from 4 p.m. onwards doing the property and until finally works. So then my next question is the following, which is something that you described that makes sense, okay? But when you hear the stories here, people until COVID happened, until someone get fired, until someone get married, until a child was born. Then they say, okay, I took the decision, and then they burn the boats, which is a huge risk. I agree with you. It's a huge risk to. So why do people in corporate wait until it is the worst day on their life to start the journey to become the best day on their life? That transition can be done. You done it, but tell us your story. Something drastic happened to you, and then you decide to start your own business, or no?
I have a very weird sort of background. So first of all, I started working at age 11, like a real job, not babysitting. I worked in a hair salon doing everything except for the hair. First leadership role was at 14. I was the assistant manager of the shoe store I worked at. I've always worked multiple jobs, even when I was in university, including I was actually an actor in my youth and the casting. And so the first business I acquired was at age 20. I bought the casting agency that represented me. So although I've always had the mindset that I was going to go, I say corporate, but actually my goal as a child and into my university years was to be a lawyer, but in the corporate world, most likely, and until I discovered the corporate world. So I love being a leader. I love the complexity that comes with like large enterprise, but I have this incredible entrepreneurial spirit as well. So the through line of my career has been large corporate, many of which are large publicly traded companies, right? I've worked for a number of, I'm originally from Canada. I live in the US now, but like I worked for a number of Canada's largest banks. I worked in the US for American Express. I worked for IBM. I worked for Accenture, large companies, complexity. But then that first company I bought at 20, I bought my first house at 19. So I've had it sort of a real estate, flip throughout my career. I built a business that was a passion project that turned into a business. But I did it when my children were quite young. I ended up getting my family, my nanny, whatever involved in it until it got too big and I sold it. And then I bought another company. I tend to be scale up versus pure startup. So I bought a data and analytics company back in 2017 that I sold about 18 months later. Unstoppable You has been mine. I've had it for about 20 years. And that's my outlet. And so for me to do, so that's kind of been my journey. But to your question here in terms of what's the switch, I think people have intention to do it. But as I keep saying, I think fear and money often is what stops them. And then I just think they hit a wall. As you said, maybe it's the worst day of their life. They are so fed up with the politics in their organization, the leader that they're reporting to, the stuff that cascades down that they can't say no to being forced to perform. And they just go, I'm done. I'm out. And then something that was sitting here and maybe it's so nascent They go, I'm just going to do it. They're like, what could be worse than the mental anguish I have sitting in this environment? And then they just go for it. However, that's where I would try and coach against that or start to build slowly. So if you get to that point, again, there's a little something to work with versus starting from scratch and then like waiting however long before revenue starts coming in the door.
Oh, you bought a data analysis company. That's interesting. So my next question is women in tech. What are the biggest challenge that you face? I have a female founder friend of mine. She's about to exit her company right now, and but she said that the journey has been hard, especially in the fundraising, because women in tech is the more minority part in a boys club, where the boys have the money, where the boys have the expertise. She told me that she have been told several times in the raising fund side that, oh, why we don't bring a boy CTO and a CEO to take care of this? And that's the only way this is that we can give you the funding. But and so she keep fighting and fighting and fighting, and she said, well, they want more revenue, and so they increase the revenue right to the point that the numbers spoke for themselves, big time. And on the other hand, we have all personally trained people in corporate, and we have one graduate on Harvard that she told me, Harry, I've been hired because I look good in the C-suite to have a female there. But I'm a Harvard graduated, and since I'm in this corporate, they pay me a lot of money, but nobody take me seriously. Nobody even take on board what I say. I realized after all that I've been hired just because I look good in a C-suite, but not because they of my work. And she said, how more I can prove myself? I'm a Harvard graduate, I have an extensive career like everybody else in the C-suite. So tell us the biggest challenges of women in tech and how you overcome that challenge. That somebody told you that this is not a good idea for you to buy a data analyst company, being a female in tech.
It's interesting. So I will tell you, first of all, I've worked in big tech. I remember when at IBM, I walked into, and at the time, I was the most senior woman in Canada when I worked there, and then I moved to the US with them. So I walked into a meeting leading a large strategy session, and it was myself, one other woman, and 40 men. The disparity around women in tech is incredibly real, which is sad. And then when you look to like VC, PE, where the funding goes, something like it used to be 4%, but if you look at last year's data, it's down to only around 2.5% of
Wow,
VC
really?
goes to women. Yet what's interesting, if you look at like crowdfunding, like Kickstarter, et cetera, women outperform men typically in terms of their ability to raise funding. So like very different. When it's stark when you see that. Again, part of the reason why I named my LLC Unstoppable You, like there's nothing that's going to prevent me from achieving my goal or objective. So I've never been concerned about walking into a room of predominantly men. My first executive role came when I was 24 years old. I was the only woman, and I was the youngest at the time by 2 decades. And so for me, the one thing I've always believed, I'm not a fan of fake it till you make it, except when it comes to confidence. And so I showed up with confidence, even when internally I wasn't feeling it. And so I just own the room. I walk in. So for me to go and buy a data and analytics company, interestingly, I bought it from another woman. Although it was a bit of a side hustle. She wasn't really meshed in, it was in marketing. She wasn't really meshed into tech so much, which was part of the reason she was looking to sell this business. I didn't even give it a second thought, but I see it consistently, and I need to coach the women, many women on my team to confidently own it, show up. But I also will talk to my male colleagues around the role they need to play as allies in supporting the women that are around them to allow them to progress and do more and better and potentially go and buy or build their own.
So I think I interviewed the Minister of economy of Zimbabwe. I think it was a while ago. And he told me, Harry, we have a program there in Zimbabwe that we lend money to the farmers, and then they take this money, they grow some vegetables, and they sell those vegetables. With that money, they pay back the loans, and they can come and ask for another. And he told me something interesting. He told me, however, let me tell you something. We have a huge percentage of women paying back the loans and growing the business. On the other hand, we're not happy with men. Yeah. So he told me, so as government, seeing the data, we're more happy to, because of course, these women, they have children, they have responsibilities. So they're taking care of the money carefully and make sure that, that these vegetables are going to be sold in a way that they can pay back the loans and so they can grow more and they can feed the family. Whether they were not happy with the data that was coming out of men on the sense. So again, have proven that women can deal with funds. They budget the households of most of the family, I think, in the world, right? And yet we have this cultural barrier, which I think that the people that looks more are the VC because they're missing out the huge opportunities. And so we need to keep working. And so, Victoria, why do you think that the number decreased? Because we talk a lot about this subject in this podcast. I'm sure, I'm a big fan of women empowerment. And I train speakers all over the world and do our workshop shows with sometimes even more women than men, right? So again, I make sure that I create a framework where they're comfortable and the space, right? So why things are getting worse and worse?
I won't go down a political rabbit hole here. However, sadly, I think politics has a pretty significant part to play in that, particularly in North America.
Politics were in the banks, in the venture capitalists.
I'm a Canadian that lives in the US. And, the US politics that have, reversed a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. They've defunded, right? They've eliminated those roles, certainly in any government offices, and grants and funding to organizations. Heck, I was even looking, and this is public, I'm not like breaking any news, but my former employer IBM just had to pay, it was I think I saw it on Friday, the news, a $17 million penalty for DEI claims as it relates to their federal contracts and how they had right. So, but as a result, unfortunately, I think other parts of the world are much more progressive. But if they're doing business with the US, we've seen some of them follow suit or quietly soften, the commitments that they had made, right? We used to have, around, S&P around board directors, what was going to look like. So I think, unfortunately, I think politics and the environment has played a cause around the rollback that we've had, both in women in leadership roles to the thing that we just talked about. And so I don't know when the pendulum's going to swing back again. I hope it does. I was to be a quiet voice in this, so I speak up for all kinds, by the way, not just as a woman, but for all kinds of diversity. I will continue to be a loud voice. I recognize the value and benefit that comes to having diverse experience, perspectives on the team.
Yeah. I live in London, so if you go to an office in London and you see the office, you will be shocked. You see, you have then black, white, Chinese, Japanese, people from all over the world. This is how a corporate office looks in London. If you look, if you find 20% of British people.
Again, where I come from in Canada, same thing. Like there's it, which I love. So I sadly right now when I travel, and I do in global roles, I travel pretty extensively. I make sure it's the passport that's showing proudly as I travel. I'm a little embarrassed of the current state of the country I live in.
Okay. Anyway, our role is to promote entrepreneurship, right? So, because otherwise the nothing move forward, right? These entrepreneurs who get those jobs and make the economy move forward. So let's talk also about property. You said that you were doing some flips. Again, out of the 500 millionaires that we interview, 1 out of 5 are in tech, the other 1 out of 5 are in property. So same question. What are the good, the bad, and the ugly in property? And what's your experience having becoming a property owner? That's very impressive with 20 years old. When I had that age, I was partying and having a lot of fun. Yeah. No way that I'm gonna have the responsibility to have a mortgage at 20 years old. So tell us about that. That is, and what is your view, the good, the bad, and the ugly property?
Yeah. So first house was 19. The first business I bought was at 20. And so first of all, I get to tell you, like, I mean, I come from like extremely humble beginnings. I was born to a drug addicted teenager. I was adopted out of that environment to a family of low social economic status, who rented their entire lives. And so for me, that's just, your audience needs to know, like, my drive, my why is because I was determined I'll be better than biology, my biological mother and where I came from, or circumstance, the family in which I was raised. So I knew like things like having real estate, which is why I didn't stay into acting. I was a realist back then, and bought the casting agency instead. And so that's my drive. So by the way, I gave that first house to my parents a couple years later when I got relocated for work. They lost it 2 years later in a bankruptcy. They're second. Anyway, so again, lessons learned. So good, bad, ugly. So I mean, good. I have done extremely well financially with real estate. I've done a mix of new development, and then flipping it 1 to 2 years later, for huge profits, to buying resale homes, and doing complete, renos, and again, flipping and making decent money. So I mean, I think there's incredibly like great opportunity if you're smart around where you buy, and again, strategy over like build, renovate, etc., and the contractors you work with. The bad and ugly. So I've lived in multiple cities in the US, predominantly New York and Miami. And the bad and ugly have existed very much in Miami, I will say. And it's because of the contractors. So it just learning like to find the good ones. Here everyone operates on Miami time. And so what you think is going to take 6 weeks or 3 months to get done, you've got to at least double that. So if you're thinking about it purely from a flip perspective, you need to, again, budget that in terms of what that, is going to, look like. And of course, what's happened the last couple of years, and we've seen, with interest rates going up, I think like, from 3 to 6.5%, depending on, where you were and with credit, like that has a very material, impact on that. And also housing prices as well, how we've, seen based upon, again, what's happening macroeconomically as well. So those are both bad and ugly, but I still think it's a safe, I'll use air quotes, because there's no safe investment, but there are, unless you're putting it in like some bonds or something that give you next to nothing in returns, but safer from a real estate perspective. So I generally will advise like, even who come to me for financial advice, not that I'm an expert, but to start to look at real estate in some of these safer bets that can give some decent returns until you get a little bit more savvy, you find the good contractors, that kind of thing.
Victoria, if someone is in love with this conversation, how people can find you, how this process works. Tell us a little bit more about Unstoppable You.
Yeah, well, first of all, Unstoppable You is my business I'm a best-selling author. I've written multiple books. I have a couple more that will be coming out this year. I'm a professional
Tell
public
us the
speaker.
title. What are the titles and where people can buy them?
Yeah, so first book is Unstoppable. The second one on branding is called Influence Unleashed. The third is Leadership and Culture, called The Power of Whole Human Leadership. And the two that are coming out this year one is a leadership transition guide for those who are making a leap. What does that look like? And then the fourth is the follow-on to the Influence Unleashed book more on how do you activate your brand, and it's called Influence Activated. It's on everywhere you buy your books or listen to audiobooks, so Amazon, etc. However, to your other question, how do people get in contact with me? I have a website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I'm sure that'll be in your show notes, so they don't need to figure out how to spell that. And from there, they can click to link out with me on the other social channels, as well as buy the books there if they'd like.
So, last message for entrepreneurs that are struggling, they're having a hard time, and they they think, oh my God, this is not working. I think I'm gonna quit and I'm gonna find a job. Yeah, 'cause I remember uh, back in the day when I was quitting my first business, always thinking, okay, you know what, I quit and I just continue with my job and that's. But the next day you wake with energy again and to work through it. So, what's your message for entrepreneurs having a hard time now?
So I started by talking about resilience. I have sort of a multi-step process when I think about a healthy level of resilience. And I say that because I think some people are unhealthy, like they wear their suit of armor, they and they never process. Like I don't think just dealing with it, never processing it is the healthy. So for me, that being resilient in a healthy manner is be really clear on the goals, the objectives that you've set for yourself, or in this case, your business. The next is to be incredibly self-aware and reflective. So spending the time to understand when things go wrong, what could you have done differently, or how did you react in that moment? And then the next is then to model the thoughts, the language, the actions, the behavior that get you towards that goal or objective. The fourth one, I've also mentioned it, but is surround yourself with an amazing community of people that will support you, or within your business, the people that can bring the expertise that you don't. Sometimes it's professional help. If you need that, you need to go see a counselor. Great. And the last one is give yourself permission to fail. And that was a hard one for me. I'm very A-type. I used to be a bit of a perfectionist. Give yourself permission to fail. Get back up, dust yourself off. One foot in front of the other is progress.
Oh, thank you so much, Victoria. And these broadcasts have been amazing. Yeah? What a masterclass in business. I think our listeners, if I were you, listen to this podcast twice so you can digest what Victoria had shared here. And if you need support, you know where to find her. And for all of you, following the broadcast, our next episode on Unstoppable. Yeah, today we have Unstoppable You. Our next episode, How Great Entrepreneurs by Victoria break that wall and achieve the first meet. For now.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential, audacious entrepreneurs that overcame challenges and adversity, providing you with the blueprint of how they sold their first million so you can grow your business exponentially.